a little croaky. But yeah, this should be a useful session. So just to tell you guys what we're talking about, so it's 8 tips for keeping your customers engaged in pre-sales presentations. We're going to go back and forth, do a tip each, have a bit of discussion. But if you're watching now, put a hashtag live and where you're from in the chat, just so we know that people have managed to tune in. And just yeah, while we're doing that, I'll give a bit of an introduction myself. So my name is Dan. I'm a business English and communication coach, and I work specifically with non-native speakers of English in pre-sales. So for people who their English ability is a barrier to them, doing good presentations, to them getting more sales, working in larger territories, and going for new job opportunities. And also, I have with me today, hello, Bill. Thank you, Bill. Hello, Antoinette. Thank you, Alvin. Great, fantastic. It's working. I'm very pleased. Yeah. So, at any point, please put in your questions. We'll be happy to answer them. So, let me hand over to Ramzi. Ramzi, can you give an introduction for those who don't know you? I'm sure most people will.
Well, thank you, Dan. So my name is Ramzi Marjaba. I'm a solution specialist, whatever that means, in Canada, and I'm a SE coach. So I help SEs upskill, get better at what they do, which includes communicating, generally speaking, with customers, but also internally with their peers. And this is a very interesting topic because we do a lot of communications with our customers as part of being an SE. So happy to talk about it. And I guess I'll just jump into point number one, and it's kind
Yeah.
of relaying what you just said. You said today we're here to talk about X, and
Mm,
the point tip number one is have an agenda. Early on in my career, my agenda was to do a presentation, but that's not really an agenda. Like, what's the point of the presentation? What are we trying to get out of this presentation? What are we trying to convey to our customers? And what are we trying to get out of our customers? And what is the goal for the meeting, the purpose, and the next steps that we want to have with our customers? Obviously, the things can change, and we might have to adapt on the fly. But at least with an agenda, the customer knows what we're doing, and if we're going off topic, we can always bring it back in.
mm,
And if the customer doesn't agree with our agenda and they think it's completely useless to them, then we can kind of stop and
mm,
save ourselves some time, or we come up with a better agenda working with the customers. So doing the presentation, doing a demo is not an agenda. What are you trying to get out of it? The points you're trying to make and what you're trying to get out of the customer. That's what the agenda should be, at least in my mind.
Okay, so
Uh,
is this something you have to agree with the customer beforehand, or is it just something you have in your mind when you're going into the presentation, into the meeting?
I mean, you can have different kinds of like agendas. There, for me personally, I always have an agenda in my mind of what I want to achieve. But it's always good to have communication with the customer to see if we're on the same page. Now, if you're doing a discovery call, so I see this a lot, especially with sales engineers, where let's say we're working with an SDR or an account manager, and the salesperson says, "Ramsey, we're going to do a discovery," but the customer, their agenda is we want to see the product, we want a demo. There's already a disconnect.
Mm,
So we have to at least set the expectation, and the agenda could be like we're just going to have a chat about X. We're not going to show anything.
mm,
So you have to have your own agenda in your mind, what you're trying to achieve, the private agenda, because you're not going to share all the information with your customers. You're not going to tell them, "I want to know about your current situation, about your next situation, whatever it is." But you can have your own private one, the one with your account manager, and you can have a kind of a generalized agenda with your customer.
mm.
But always go into a meeting with an agenda, even if it changes. But at least it guides you through your conversation.
Okay, got it. Yeah, it's a really good first point. I think you need to have an aim when you're
Yeah,
coming in. If you don't have that aim, then you're sort of lost from the word go,
yeah.
right?
I mean, imagine we come in on this call, and you have your thoughts of what we're doing on this call, and I have my own thoughts, and now we're just out of sync already, right? We won't get a lot of out of this call. The like Bill, who said he's live in London. We'll not get much out of this call. So yeah, like we kind of have to have our agenda and keep our viewers, our audience in mind of what they need to get out of it as well.
Excellent. Yeah. Great. I mean, that kind of brings me on to my next point. So one of the things that we discussed, our agenda for this call, is that we'd have slightly different angles to take about this. So obviously my speciality is talking about how to be a good presenter in terms of how you use your voice and how you deliver your message, whereas your tips are very much from that pre-sales angle. So if I come in
Yeah,
with my first tip, and my first tip is to be concise. So I'm sure you've all heard this tip before, and you know that you need to be concise, so to communicate your ideas in as fewer words as possible. But that's not always easy to do for a number of reasons, right?
yeah,
So one of the keys to being concise is to if you're someone who's not very good at being concise and tends to talk too much in the presentation and tends to ramble and go off topic, is you want to first examine the reasons for this. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples, right? So example number one is someone who gets really nervous when they're in that position where they have to present, the camera's on them, they have to do some public speaking essentially. What might happen is, because you're nervous, you talk too much and maybe it's the wrong tone, right? Maybe you're too informal, you talk too long on the introduction, and you sort of go into details that are not necessary, and you're not answering that what's in it for me question for the audience, right? So again, it's about the audience, as you said. Another example could be that maybe you have a belief that more talking equals more value, right? So you think, oh, the more I say about the product, the more value that the customer is going to get, the prospect is going to get. But also, we know that from a sales perspective, you want to be talking less about features, more about the benefits. Or my scenario number three is that, as with a lot of people I work with, English is not their first language. So they're not sure whether they've expressed themselves uh, fully or accurately. So what happens is they then talk more to try and overcompensate for this. So in each of these situations, you know the problem that's stopping you being concise. Number one, it's maybe you're nervous and you need to practice deep breathing techniques before you start, calm your nerves. Number two, you need to think back to your sales training. What should you actually be talking about in that presentation, referring back to the agenda. And then number three, maybe it's you need to improve your English level. You need to actually have a better knowledge of expressions that you can use to keep your sentences short and concise. So just to recap that point, it's all about examining your beliefs and what it is that makes you a not very concise speaker.
can I provide a couple more tips related to
Yes,
this?
of course. Yeah, jump in. Yeah.
Before I jump in, just I want to ask everybody who's watching: is the quality good? Like I'm monitoring it and I'm seeing a little bit of a hiccup in our video. So
Okay.
let us know if you actually see this properly
Yeah.
uh,
Thank you. Yeah.
in the chat. Uh, if uh, if you are, here are a couple more tips. The great thing about sales engineering, and again, I'm coming from a sales engineer perspective, is that we're not public speakers; we're public askers. So if we're in the middle of a speech and we feel like we're not answering the right question,
Mm,
we can always stop and actually ask if we're on the right track. We don't have to go through our scripted speech. If we look at our audience and they're falling asleep, you're not answering the right question. You can stop and ask, am I on the right
mm.
track? Am I answering your question? What do you mean by that? So we don't always have to just answer. Thank you, everybody, for telling me that the quality is fine. I appreciate that.
Yes. Thank you.
So yeah, I mean, you have the option to actually stop and ask questions. And one thing I see a lot of, especially new SEs, make mistakes in is they prepared something and they want to tell it. Doesn't matter if they closed the deal already, they still want to go through it
Yeah,
and they
of
want
course.
to.
Yeah, it's natural, right?
Yeah, I mean, I worked hard on this. I'm gonna say every single word that
Yeah,
I
I
scripted.
spent all night preparing.
So if at one point the customer says, you know what, this is perfect, this is exactly what I need, and you still have 5 minutes of demo or presentation prepared, just close the laptop. Great.
Mm,
What are the next steps based on what we just talked about today?
yeah.
I mean, obviously, if there's something that will qualify a deal out, you can ask it. But if not, if you just want to talk about more features, just stop. You don't need to.
Mm,
So, yeah, that's
yeah.
a great point. All right, so I guess I'll continue talking and be
Yes.
unconcise. Uh, the next tip I have is I have it written down as whiteboarding, but what I actually mean is be interactive. So whiteboarding is one way to be interactive. We're you and I right now, Dan. We're having a presentation with zero slides
Mm,
because we're being interactive with each other, which would help our audience versus having a presentation where one person with a monotone voice is just going through it. So whiteboarding is one aspect. Whether you're in person or if you're remote, have maybe if you want to have a presentation PowerPoint like PowerPoint slide ready, have it ready, but be able to annotate on it. Be able to show stuff on the screen. I mean, Network Chuck. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Network Chuck. If anyone's familiar with Network Chuck, give us a thumbs up right now. But he explains a lot of stuff and he draws on the screen as he's talking, which makes it a little bit more interactive than having a
mm,
PowerPoint slide and going through that. So find ways, whether it's through polls, whether through a whiteboarding, through presentations, through talking to someone else doing the presentation with you, find ways to actually be interactive versus being non-interactive.
yeah. Sure.
Does it make sense?
I think it takes confidence to step away from the crutch of having the PowerPoint slides.
Yeah,
And
I mean
when you
everything.
can step away from that, maybe you can be more interactive in your presentation.
I mean, it takes steps. You have to learn to walk before you learn to run. Uh, so if you right now you're not comfortable with PowerPoint presentations, and again, the good thing is about PowerPoints or the good thing about sales engineering is that we're not public speakers. We have the luxury of sitting back and asking questions. So instead of us doing a spiel about everything that's on the PowerPoint behind us or on the screen, we can ask questions that will highlight things on the screen.
Mm,
So there are different levels, and you can advance as you're getting better, as you're getting more comfortable. Uh, the thing I would note against is getting complacent. Now I'm good at doing presentations, so I'm just gonna do it the same way for the rest of my life.
right.
We can experiment and we can fail, but at least we're having fun and we're trying new things.
Lovely.
Yeah,
Lovely.
thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Okay. That kind of brings me on to my next tip. I mean, you said we're not public speakers,
Yeah,
but you know, speaking is part of what we do. So we need to make sure that when we're speaking, the message we're giving is clear and easy to understand. And one thing that can be a barrier to that is excessive use of filler language. So this is my tip number two, right? Avoid excessive use of filler language. Now, filler language is you know, like kind of, sort of. And what I want to say is that filler language is a totally natural part of speech, right? It's completely normal to use filler language. But there are times when, if you're giving a presentation and you're trying to be concise, that filler language can become a barrier. It can actually muddy the message, it can dilute the message and make it less clear. So instead of eliminating filler language, because that's a completely, you know, that's just not something you want to do. You know, you still want to sound natural when you're speaking. What you want to do is examine what your habits are in terms of using filler language. So, a bit like with my first point, I talked about examining your habits in terms of what makes you sometimes speak too much and be too wordy. You can actually examine the filler language that you use. So, for example, for me, you may have heard this already. I tend to use like quite a lot. I tend to say like quite a lot. So it's kind of a bad habit, I guess. But if I wanted to reduce the amount I'm saying like or asking okay, things like that in presentations, I would actually try and examine how I'm using that filler language. So if you're using filler language too much, it can have the effect of it makes you seem nervous, it makes you seem unsure, it can damage your credibility and the trust that people have in you. So, a couple of exercises you can do if you want to look at reducing your filler language and discovering the filler language you use is to record yourself giving a short off the cuff presentation. So with absolutely no preparation, record yourself and then listen back and note down the number of times that you used a filler and see if you can reduce it for the next time. See if you can become familiar with the kind of filler language that you use. Another tip is filler language often happens because we're nervous and we use it in place of a pause. So we
So
may, like make a sentence like that, right? It's not a good sentence. So again, it's what you can do is if it happens because of nerves, is think about taking a deep breath before you start and learning to embrace the pause, right? Embrace the pause when you finish making a key point, when you're changing from slide to slide. That also gives your audience, the people who are listening to you, some time to digest what's being said. So don't be afraid of that pause, learn to embrace it. And again, examine your habits in terms of the filler language that you use.
can I offer a challenge?
Oh, yes. Okay, go for it.
From now until the end of the call, I
Yeah.
want people to
Oh,
count.
you're going to tell me to cut my filler language.
Well, what the challenge is, I want someone who, multiple people, whoever is available, to count how many filler words we have. Right now, we're at 1627. So I want to count how many Dan has and how many I have, and the winner, I guess, with more filler words, is more filler words considered three filler words right now. I have to do the So whoever has more filler words gets to give the person who counted a bear hug when
Mm.
we're feeling better and we're not transmitting any
Yeah,
diseases.
I would.
So,
Yeah, I wouldn't come close to me at the moment because
yeah.
I'm sick as a dog. But
So that's the challenge that I have for us. I've already said so like 5 times. So there you
yeah,
go.
that's the thing. You got to be conscious of it, but sometimes as soon as you start to be conscious, it makes you do it more. But
Yeah.
yeah,
It's a good practice what we're doing right now.
mm,
It's leading by example, if you will,
mm,
showing how bad we
yeah.
are at filler words. Consider we don't practice that often
Yeah, I
enough.
want to reiterate that filler language is not a bad thing, but it's only a bad thing when it affects the clarity of your message, right? So
Distract.
you turn one short sentence into a long sentence full of fillers. Yeah,
I had a salesperson who would use every
yeah.
other word,
And that
and
that one actually is, sorry to interrupt, Ramsey, but
yeah,
that one it's you're saying it because you want to clarify that they've understood, and it shows that you're maybe not convinced about what you're saying. You're not confident. So that's a good one to avoid. Yeah.
from my perspective, it was just distracting. And I've heard customers on multiple occasions tell that salesperson, "No, I don't know. What do you mean by you know?"
Mm,
One or two filler words here and there is not horrible.
mm.
It's you said you want to sound human, not a robot,
Yes, that's
but
yeah.
having them often is kind of distracting.
Right. Ramsey, there's a question for you here.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe you want to field this.
So it's Alvaro. Hey, Alvaro, it's good to see you, and or I guess see your picture. What you're and he's saying what you're saying about where public answers is true, except if you work for a company where the pre-sales are not leading the opportunity together with the sales team. I agree. I mean, we have a lot of different aspects to sales engineering. When we're not leading the opportunity together with the sales team, generally speaking, for me, and correct me if I'm wrong, Alvaro, uh, that means that we're coming in during the demo. Mostly, we're coming in doing a demo and leaving. But even during that, we have a bigger responsibility. We're talking more, sure, which is why this session I would think it would be useful because we want to avoid having filler words. We want to have an agenda, be concise, and all that. But still, we can be public askers. The thing that I see when we're doing that, when we're pre-sales who come in for the demo, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, Alvaro, if we're coming in for the demo, is that we're assuming everything that the salesperson told us is right, and in many cases, it's half right. It's not. It doesn't have all the information, and we still need a lot of information to understand and to actually speak to the customer in a way that would resonate with them. So yes, we do have to speak. We always have to speak. When someone asks a question, I say we're public askers. So we can ask a question, the customer would respond, and then we'd have to provide our own answer to their response. So we do have that. And the tip that I was given at the time is if in the moment you don't know if you're speaking too much, if you're being if you're sharing too much, you can stop and ask, did I answer your question? Or am
Mm.
I oversharing? I like to ask that.
Yeah.
Am I on the right path for you? It doesn't mean that we don't talk. I mean, obviously, you and I, Dan, we're doing that right now. And it's not something I enjoy. Like, I don't enjoy talking for a long period of time because I don't know if I am on the right track. Right now, in this moment, in my head, I'm thinking, am I rambling? I'm
You're
going to
good.
pause
You're
here
good.
and say, Dan, am I rambling? So,
Lovely.
yeah. And that's what I mean by being public askers and having the ability to be concise.
Great, got that. I just want to point out the comment that Chris made. Yeah, saying that filler language tends to happen when the mouth gets ahead of the brain. So you have to learn to force the mouth to be still until the brain gives it the words to use. Yeah, fantastic. That's a great point.
We have a lot
Ram,
of famous
sorry,
people
what are
on
you
this
gonna say?
call. I was just gonna say we have a lot of famous people on this
Famous
call.
people, yeah.
I pretty much know a lot of you guys, so I'm happy you guys are here. Chris,
That's
I
great.
appreciate
Yeah,
you being here. Alvaro, thank you for coming. Gary, Alvin, you guys are amazing. Thank you for being here, and
yeah, I
everybody.
appreciate
I
it
can't I
too. Yeah.
can't say everybody's name, but yeah, you know who you are.
Ramsey, I'm now confused because we've done a lot of back and forth, but is it your tip next?
I
I
think
think
you
it is.
mentioned avoid filler words, so yeah, it is my
It's your
turn.
tip next, yeah.
Wait, thank you, Alvaro, for agreeing, and this brings me to the kind of what we were talking about with Alvaro. Ask engaging questions. Again, we're public askers. We do have to speak, but we're also public askers. And even if we're doing a presentation, always script a couple questions in my presentations, and I don't go more than 2 slides without pausing and asking questions beyond, do you have any questions? Whenever I ask that question, do you have any questions? The answer is pretty much always no. But I usually alleviate that by asking questions about what we're talking about. Okay, Dan, I just mentioned this. What are your thoughts specifically around that?
Mm,
Or how do you see this working in your environment? Or how would you
mm.
use this now that we've talked about it? I'm going to cough for a second. Do I need to announce that? I don't know. Anyway, so I always like to script, whether it's a demo, whether it's a presentation, whatever it is, whenever we're meeting with a customer, I always have a couple questions in the back of my mind ready to go, so that I can keep them with me. As
Mm,
soon as uh, I've had this situation, like we're talking right now, Alvaro asked questions, Chris commented. Well, Alvaro commented and Chris commented. I've heard people say, and Bill commented on one of my posts earlier, saying, "Hold your questions to the end." And Bill's response, like, "Are they in sales engineering? Do they know their job?" And
mm.
so we want people to communicate with us. We want to be able to get information as much as possible from our customers, from our salespeople. Let's say we're jumping into, like Alvaro, we're jumping into a demo and we don't have as much information as possible. We need to ask those questions to
Mm.
our salespeople counterparts. So I'm going to pause here for a second. Dan, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I like that. I like the fact that you said every 2 slides. Is that something you stick to rigorously, or is that depending on?
It, it's
Yeah.
it, the way I see it is every time it depends on the density of the slide. So
Mm,
if there's one slide where I'm talking about for 5 minutes, well, that's, I guess, a very dense slide, and I'd have to break it up using questions, and it could be because it's a corporate slide. I would never build a slide where I'd have to do that. But it's more about feeling, and if I'm talking about something that's, let's say I did a discovery with a customer, and they mentioned something specific, and as I'm going through the slide, I hit on what they were talking about. At that point, I have to pause and ask to make sure that I answered their questions. Slides, we use the slides. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's by feel at this point. But if you're starting off your career as a sales engineer or as a salesperson and you want to be more engaging, you can have a question at every slide. It doesn't really matter, and you can gauge the conversation. Sometimes too many questions, they're like, "Why is this guy interrogating me?"
yeah,
And too little is like, "This guy doesn't care about me." So you will find the balance as you get better at sales engineering.
yeah. I guess the skill as well is to ask the right kind of open questions, which is a challenge in itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why if you script it, it's better.
Yeah.
If you have the
Yeah.
questions ready, you won't forget to ask yes, like you won't have to ask yes or no questions. It's more
What about a lot of people I speak to? Their big fear is being asked challenging questions throughout the presentation. Obviously, they understand they have to ask questions, but also worry about being asked difficult questions. Would
yeah.
you, some of the advice I would give is to try and anticipate what kind of questions are going to come up, or even what kind of objections might occur during the presentation. Is that something you do, Ramsey?
Yeah, and this comes with practice. There's always something surprising. So Chris is here, Chris Waite's here. He's the author of the 6 Habits of Highly Effective People.
I'm reading the book.
Yeah, so he has the process of this, like the 4 Ds, and Chris is gonna kill me later because I can't remember all of them. But uh, defer, direct. Chris, forgive me, but basically, depending on who's asking the question and the the relativity, like what's the good word? See, that's where my immigrant is coming out. I can't think of the right word. Where how useful that question is to the conversation. You
Mm,
can either choose to answer it, you can choose to ask more clarifying questions about why they're asking that question, what's their purpose.
mm,
uh, you can't anticipate everything, but the more meetings you have, the more questions, the more objections you have in your repertoire, in
mm,
terms of like, they asked me this question last time, so this time if they ask me this, I'll answer it that way. No, nothing is clear from day one.
mm,
Practice. I mean, again, our kids, my kids, I know they were born and they didn't know how to sit up straight, and now they're running around, and it didn't happen overnight. They're 7, 6, and 7 and 5. They had to learn how to walk, they had to
mm,
learn how to run, and we're expecting people to become SEs, and day one they're already experts. They're not.
mm,
They're gonna fail miserably, and that's the hard part about, like, whenever you grow up. Like, I went to study did jiu-jitsu
mm.
for 6 months. I sucked really bad at it. I was frustrated. Like, why do I suck so bad at jiu-jitsu? I mean, like, I know how to. I'm a strong man. I know how to do this,
Yeah.
but it's a skill. Like everything else, you're gonna have to learn it.
Mm. Yeah. I also think, just to chip in about presentation skills, you have kind of standard presentation skills, your sort of very traditional presentation, but it's a full spectrum. So you have the more intimate style of presentation that you're used to with pre-sales. So I imagine people, when they come in first time, they maybe know how to do your traditional presentation, but they need to adapt
Yeah,
and make it more interactive, which, yeah, it takes confidence to be able to ask and field those questions during the presentation.
100%. It doesn't happen overnight,
Yeah,
and
sure.
you can shadow other people. Like, I would love to be around Chris or Alvaro or Kerry or Alvin, like in a meeting, and watching them do it, because I've been doing this for almost 10 years. They have their own style of doing things,
Mm,
and they would answer questions very differently than how I would answer questions, and they have their own style, and I can learn so much and pick up so much from the way they answer questions, that I can actually integrate it. Even after doing this for 10 years, I can integrate it into my own process. Now imagine you're brand new. You should be able to do that as well. You should be able to follow and shadow people, and see
mm,
how they do it. And it's much easier now than it ever was, because not everything is live. Not everything's in
mm,
person. You can do it all through this, through a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting. And sometimes all you need to do is ask, "Can I
mm,
shadow?" And a lot of people are afraid to do that.
yeah. And even ask for feedback, like my first couple of points about trying to identify what you can do to improve, where the problem is, in terms of whether you're not being concise in the way you speak, whether you use too much filler. It's very hard to spot this on your own, but if you got someone who can help, like a mentor, a friend or teacher, then yeah, that's perfect. Yeah.
I would recommend, if you're going to ask for feedback, let people know you're going to ask for feedback before you get into the call. Because if you tell them by the end of the call, like, "Hey, any feedback for me?" the response is more often than not is like,
It's
"Yeah,"
fun.
unless there's something glaringly obvious,
Yeah.
because everyone's paying attention to their own performance.
Yeah.
So ask it before you jump into the call.
Okay, lovely. Great. I guess that takes me on to my next point. So, you've talked a lot about how you're public askers, not public speakers in the sort of traditional sense when we think of public speaking, to a room with a couple of hundred people. But it's important that we still, even in a more intimate situation when we're trying to be engaging, and that's what these tips are about, to be able to use your voice effectively. So what do I mean by using your voice effectively? So I guess it's about using three things well. So being able to vary the pitch of your voice so that you don't speak in a flat monotone like that, because there's nothing worse than anyone who's trying to tell you any kind of information in a sort of flat monotone. Something in your brain just immediately switches off. And also being able to vary the volume and being able to vary the pace as well. So a couple of things, if you are a native speaker of English, obviously you're very used to the stress rules and how we change the pitch as we speak. But often in those high pressure situations, people revert to that very monotone way of speaking because they're thinking, their cognitive power is elsewhere, trying to remember what they need to say, thinking about the right questions to ask. So it can be very difficult for native speakers for this. But if you are non-native speaker and you want to improve sort of the rhythm of how you speak so you can be more engaging, the way to do this is to get a better understanding of the stress rules in English. So, in terms of within a word, which syllable we stress so that we can be understood when we're speaking, but also the words in a phrase and the words in a sentence. So, when you develop that, you can develop a more natural rhythm in terms of the way you speak, and you can be a more engaging speaker. So that's something I help people with quite a bit.
S One thing I would like to add is it's a performance, right? I am amongst my family, I'm very monotone, right? I'm not too excited, I'm not too unexcited. I'm fairly even keeled. And when I told my brother that I'm going to be doing a podcast about sales engineering, his fear was that I'm
You?
going to be on the podcast. But I was in sales for a few years by then, and I knew like, all right, I have to be a little bit more interactive. When I'm in front of customers, I'm doing something. It's a performance. So when he heard the podcast, he's like, Ramsey, you actually surprised me because I never thought you actually raised your voice, or I thought you were just, I'm going to fall asleep. Now he
Mm,
had a lot more critiques than this one compliment, so but I'll still take it. But yeah, so habit number 5, Chris.
lovely.
It's
Thank you,
we're
Chris.
performing. It's an act. We're taking our personality and we're exaggerating it by a little bit, right? We can't just be ourselves, whether it's in person or through a Zoom call. We kind of have to modify the way we think about ourselves. So
Exactly.
that's how we can actually think about improve, like raising the pitch, lowering the volume, speeding up. When I'm telling a story that's emotional, and the reason we tell stories in sales engineering is people remember stories, they forget facts.
Mm, mm,
And if you can tie it to an emotion, they'll remember it even better. So when you're telling the story, you can have to change the way you think, like be emotional, talk faster, talk slower.
mm.
So, and that will all help with the performance.
Yeah, great. Alvin's just chipped in saying practice adding the pauses as well. So, yeah,
Yeah.
pauses, obviously, we know they come with a full stop, right, with a comma, but also you can have pauses, after phrases and what we call like chunks of meaning in a sentence. So, yeah, it really is performative in the way that we use language, and it's not something that you can just, if you're not used to this kind of speaking, it's something that takes a bit of time. But again, it's about focusing on how you speak. And I really like what you said earlier, like it's kind of slightly different from normal. if
Yeah.
you're if you really want to make a message impactful, I think that's something to remember. I like that.
Yeah. We do have a few questions. Do you want to start
Yeah, I
fielding?
feel like there was a question.
So Chris had a question and Christian had a question.
Okay, let me have a look. Sorry, Christian.
I'll let you answer them first, just because of I want to put you on the spot. It's fun for me.
Okay, so how do you manage questions where you've asked a question but the entire audience just going silent? This happens to.
So
Mm,
like I would have a question about those questions. Like what kind of questions are you asking?
yeah.
um, it's something I learned from Bob Reifstall. He was on my podcast. He's the author of Demo to Win. No, yeah, Demo to Win. And the way he asks questions is a little bit different. He doesn't pause. He doesn't say any questions, right? Which is kind of what Chris.
That's the one that makes people go silent. Yeah.
Yeah, and so when you're doing a presentation, if if you want, if you know you're going to ask a questions in a second, something you could do is like, hey Dan, I'm going to be talking about this, and I want to come back to you in a second to see your thoughts. So what I did with that is I put Dan on alert that I'm going to come back and ask him a question specifically, and then I talk about whatever it is that I need to talk about, and then I ask the question.
Mm,
Dan, what are your thoughts around this, or how do you feel about this, or what are you going to do with the information that I provided? So that helps me not get to the point where people are going to be silent.
yeah.
Right? Uh,
I think, yeah. So if, yeah, I'd just say that that's good advice to actually prep people at the beginning,
yeah,
what your expectations are of them in the
it's like
presentation.
asking
Yeah.
for feedback, right?
Yeah.
Let them
Yeah.
know that you're going to ask for feedback. Let
See,
them know you're going to
if you sort of prep them saying, I will be asking some questions about this, I'd love to get your feedback. Then
ask.
people are, no one likes that. Any questions? That's what
Yeah,
just makes people go silent. Yeah. I think also maybe if you're, it might be that they haven't heard the question correctly. You can always rephrase, use a simple phrase like, let me just rephrase that. Let me put that another way.
yeah.
If people are looking blankly and looking confused, I guess you have to read the body language and read the expressions as well.
So have you ever heard a podcast where a host is hosting more than one person? Like they have more than one guest. And I've had that's happened to me where I've had more than one guest on my show, and then I ask the question and I don't address it to anybody. And now they're both sitting there looking at me like, who are you addressing this question to?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So even if you don't prepare them ahead of time, by the end of it, if you said something that's useful to a specific person, then you can call out that person and say, like, hey, Christian, I just talked about this. Again, what are your thoughts? Whatever
Mm,
questions that you like to ask. So you can target it that way as well. And another question I would have, and Christian, we can have an entire conversation about this, is what's the purpose of your question? Right? You must have a goal behind your question. Who are you trying to get that information from? And so we can dissect that for hours if you wish, and we can have an entire conversation around like how to ask proper questions.
mm.
So I don't know. Hopefully, I answered your question, Christian. Thank you, Alvin, for answering Susanna's question. WeTheSalesEngineers.com. Shameless plug. So
Mm.
there's also Chris's question,
Yeah.
which is related to Christian, which is we ask any questions. The audience says no, we're good, but you sense they're not. What should we do?
Mm.
And Chris already knows the answer to this. He's just testing it. So I'm gonna let you answer it, Dave.
um.
I mean, you do this
Yeah.
all the time, right? You're talking to people. You're in sales.
Yeah. I'd say, um. Is there anything you want me to clarify? Can I go over something again? I feel like I'm giving the wrong answer.
Well, I like. Well, there. I don't know if there's a wrong. Though there's my style. My style is when they say no, we're
It's
good.
not what you want to hear at the end
Yeah,
of a
yeah.
sales call,
Well,
right?
if
Yeah.
I sense that there's something wrong, first off, I messed up by asking any questions. So that's step number. I avoid asking
You
any
don't.
questions.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. But let's say we did. I mean, mistakes happen. I've done it. Any questions? No, we're good. And I can
Mm,
see that they're not understanding. There are multiple ways that I would deal with that, and it could be like, all right, so great, you're good. How do you see yourself using this? What are some of the things that would stop you from actually doing this?
mm.
Right? Uh, you can just go into a little bit more, or
So
you
kind
can
of
ask,
a probing question to find
yeah,
out, because there's some kind of objection here, right?
yeah.
Maybe
There's
it's,
an unspoken objection, which is the worst kind of objection because you can't handle
yeah,
it.
yeah. They're like, no, that's fine. I'll think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so you can go into a little bit deeper, asking more discovery questions, or you can say like, "Would you want me to repeat anything?" Which
Mm,
in many cases would land the answers like, "No, you know what? Let's just move on." Right?
mm.
So
Yeah, I
I
like the one you said. How do you see this solution working for you?
yeah,
Yeah.
So I like to ask that. Again, try not to get to any questions. And Chris, I'd love
Yeah.
to
How
get
did we do,
a
Chris?
grade on this. I'd really like. So
Great. So Ramsey, I think it's you have another point. I really like this one you're about to make.
yeah, so that's kind of my last point is be happy to be there. Again, it's part of being a performance. You can always tell if someone's not happy to be there, right? Customers in most cases, I mean, there you have a manager who's okay being there because they have to make a decision. But a lot of the people who are in the room with them, they're not happy to be there. They're not excited that you're there. Like another
Mm,
salesperson or a sales engineer coming to do their spiel. I've been invited to calls where my manager would just walk by my desk and say, "Ramsey, come with me." And I get into this meeting where someone's giving me a demo of something I have no idea what it's about. Right? So I'm not happy to be there. My manager is probably not happy to be there, which is why he invited me to share his
mm,
misery. But the SE has to be happy to be there so that he can do that performance. Right? If you're not happy, you're not smiling.
mm.
People can tell, in my opinion. So I always advise to be happy to be there.
Yeah. So I think one way, which kind of leads me on to my last tip, one way that we can show that we're happy to be there is by, my original tip was avoid negative body language, and then I decided that was not a great tip. It's more about being conscious of your body language. So if you think about when you're on a video call, most people seem to just forget that we can see them and that they need to think about their body language. So I guess one of the tips that I would give to anyone who's about to get on a video call would be to take a moment before you start, position yourself on camera if you're going to be being an engaging speaker. Make sure that the audience can see your hands, and try to avoid, touching your face, putting
I've
your
been
head.
doing that.
Things that I've been doing
I've
all
been
throughout
doing
this
that
conversation.
all.
Yeah, but these are things like it's very difficult when you're on camera like this to be conscious of body language. So I think that ties into,
Yeah,
being happy to be there, because you can very easily look not happy to be there when you forget that
yeah.
people are watching you.
I have a default frowny face. Like
Say again,
I,
sorry.
I have a default frowny face. I, I like like my mom used to like really suffer through like Ramsey, why aren't you smiling? Why aren't you happy? I'm like,
Mm,
I'm fine. So I had to work on it quite a bit. And the thing about body language is, oh, people always think that they know how to read body language, so they always read into it too much.
that's it.
So if I'm sitting back, like, hey, I honestly have nowhere to put my hands. That's
Yeah.
why I'm crossing them here. But customer
I'm thinking
says,
he doesn't. Yeah.
why is he putting his hands between us, right?
Resting
Resting
business
position.
face. Tony's just said.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I see. Alvaro said. Yeah. It turns off the view. Just to pay more attention to the attendees. Attendees. That's an interesting one. Yeah. Yeah. I
is
think
that does that
like.
mean turn off the camera? Not
Oh
okay.
yeah.
No, no. I guess he just
We
specifically
missed
said
it.
not my camera. So
We've missed a couple of questions. Maybe we can just go back.
yeah, sure.
Um. Yeah. This what Christian says, that some people are just not comfortable speaking English, and any idea to get them out of their comfort zone. Yeah, it's a tricky one. Maybe I would think back to how you sort of build rapport with them at the beginning.
Yeah.
Try and make people just feel a bit more comfortable. Maybe use a bit of humor. You could even make a joke about how you speak. Yeah, say, look, I'm not perfect. It's definitely a case of people just,
Yeah.
yeah, they're too nervous. They don't want to. So the thing you can do is, smiling, don't take yourself too seriously, right? Build good rapport. I think that's my tip there.
I agree with that, and I kind of
Mm.
did that on the call where I said, "Hey, my immigrant is coming out." Right?
Yeah,
I can't think of the right word,
yeah,
so I've done that more often than not, and it's okay. Like I want to encourage the customer, like, hey, it's okay. I'm not perfect at speaking English,
mm,
so we'll figure it out. We'll understand each other one way, shape, or form.
yeah,
So I'm gonna be talking slower, so I know what I'm talking about. Hopefully, we can actually communicate and figure this out together.
mm,
So I would just be a little bit more vulnerable about that. Uh, there's also Christian. If we answered your questions, please let us know. There's a
Yeah.
question below that from Deepak.
Yeah.
Uh, what's one thing I should keep in mind as I'm starting off my career in sales?
Yeah, I think okay. If I can, from my career in sales, I used to work in sales, not as a sales engineer, but I guess it would be that if we're talking about sales in general, you can't talk your way into a sale, which is what I sort of believed when I very first started selling. I just thought that if I hammered them with information, and if I was kind of engaging enough speaker, that people would buy what I was trying to sell. But I quickly learned, and I actually learned in what I do now. Right, when I speak to
Yeah.
people who are interested in working with me, I have to ask good questions. That's what I need to do. I need to actually really understand them. So yeah, less of the talking, more of the understanding, I guess. What do you
Well,
think, Ramsey?
100%, and it's a mentality shift. Like you start asking questions, and what that implies to me, again, the immigrant, what that implies to me is that it's about when you're in sales, it's about them, not about you.
Mm,
Right? So if you think about it from the customer's perspective, you'll be able to actually ask the right questions. You won't need to talk yourself into selling, and you'll be able to figure out, hey, I can't help you. Let's just like part ways. It's fine,
mm.
which is usually very helpful.
Yeah, I
So
hope that was helpful, Deepak.
yeah,
Um,
let's see anything else. Tony says, is by the way, is there a way on Restream to actually highlight the comments? Or I'm
I
asking
don't
that
know.
live. So she should have done that. She should have done that
I've
before.
been struggling to use the platform for the last few weeks, so
So always think. So Tony, I'd always take the onus off the customer instead of any questions. Try to have I explained this well.
yeah,
Is there anything else I can convey? That's a good point.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah, you. We talked about Alvaro resting business
Um,
phase.
yeah. Okay. Aaron gave some great advice here as well.
Yeah,
So understanding the problems rather than the product, right?
yeah. Picture of your family behind your camera. Yeah.
I
Uh,
like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's getting personal. I know someone who works at F5, and he collects basketballs, like basketballs from. He lives in New York, so he
Mm,
collected basketballs from different teams with signatures, and he has them all on his mantle behind him, and they're a
mm,
conversation starter. So having something personal is always helpful.
yeah.
How to pivot from regular account management to sales account management in tech? Oof, that's a long conversation. How to pivot from regular account management to sales account management in tech? I guess the difference is in tech. Oh, I guess I would need a lot more information.
Yeah. Send
Because
Ramsey a message. I'm sure
yeah,
he can help out with that.
yeah. Let me know.
Alvaro, yeah, you see, you speak slower when you're speaking English than in Spanish.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think that's fine. As long as you have to monitor your pace, as long as the pace that you're speaking is not making people switch off because it's too slow. But I think that's fine. If you're focusing on clarity and you're slowing down a bit for that's not a problem. I think the one thing that, um, particularly with Spanish speakers, I know that the one way to help yourself be clear and be easy to understand is to again focus on stress, focus on the rhythm, because the rhythm of Spanish is very different to the rhythm of English. So the more you focus on stress, changing your intonation, that's one thing that will help you sound more engaging. But I think it's okay to slow down a bit. Clarity is the goal.
yeah. The only place it's not okay to slow down is New York. Everywhere else, you can actually speak at a slower pace.
Yeah. Oh, we
Uh,
got another question.
so I think that's the question is being asked to Suzanne is like, you mean SDR or sales engineer?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I mean. There's a lot of information that will be required to be able to answer that question, Susanna. And as you see, like being in sales, engineering, and sales, you're going to ask a lot of questions. Account manager to upselling that customers. Oh, Kyle, are you answering Susanna? Or I
I
think
feel
I
like I
think
feel like
I
you
think you're
might be
asking
there.
Susanna. So
Right.
yeah, I think these are all the tips that we've had.
Yeah, yeah.
This,
I
we can
think
think
it's
of many more, but we only had 1 hour.
yeah, yeah. I think it's been a good conversation actually. It's
Yeah, I enjoyed
and
it.
yeah, and people, thank you so much for the questions. Really great. You've put us through our paces as well, which is good.
Yeah. No, this was fun. So again, if anybody has any more questions, you can share them right now, or you can connect with both of us on LinkedIn. Is LinkedIn the best way of communicating with you?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, you guys should be able to find our details from the page. If anyone is interested from kind of a language perspective, in improving their English, their communication skills in English, send me a message because I have a new guide I've just made. So it's 6 things you can do today to improve your communication skills and your communication style. So if you're interested, send me a message and I'll send that to you in LinkedIn chat. Who won the filler
Yeah,
word
that's
contest?
the most important question of the day. Like,
I
did you
don't
count
know.
Alvin? I don't know. I was hoping you would count Alvin, or you know, one of you. So
And thank you for your kind comments, Carl, Deepak. Really great. Yeah.
no, it's Alvin. It's Alvaro. It's between me and Dad. But hey, if you want to win a bear hug, you can get a bear hug from both of us.
Oh,
Okay. Yeah, and
awesome.
for me, I mean, connect with me on LinkedIn. Check out
Yeah,
wetheSalesEngineers.com if you're looking to upskill uh, to become a sales engineer, or upskill as a sales engineer. I mean, a lot of people, great resources here on this comment section as well. But
yeah.
connect with me. I'm happy to help.
Lovely. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. I guess we'll call it a day today.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Ramsey. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. See you. Bye bye.